The night air over ancient Rome was still warm even after the sun had disappeared behind the distant hills. The heat of the day lingered inside the stone walls and narrow streets. Somewhere far away, a dog barked once and then became quiet again. Oil lamps flickered softly behind wooden shutters. Sandals brushed against worn floors. The city, so loud beneath the bright afternoon sky, had slowly begun to settle into a softer rhythm. Inside a modest Roman home, a small flame trembled in a clay lamp near the doorway. The smell of olive oil drifted through the room. A mother folded rough linen cloth beside a sleeping child. A tired father sat quietly on a low wooden stool after a long day of labor. Dust still clung to the edges of his sandals. His shoulders ached from carrying stone under the heavy summer sun. Beyond the open courtyard, faint sounds floated through the night. Water splashed gently in a fountain nearby. Somewhere in the distance, wheels creaked slowly over uneven stone roads as the last wagons returned home before darkness fully covered the city. And above everything, the stars watched silently over Rome. Roman family life was often simple. Most families did not live in great marble villas filled with painted walls and cool fountains. Most people lived quietly in crowded buildings, small houses, or narrow rented rooms that held the warmth of the day long into the evening. Life moved according to sunlight, weather, work, and survival. In the early hours before dawn, long before the markets filled with voices, Roman homes slowly woke from sleep. The sky would still be dark blue when the first sounds began. A wooden door creaked open. A clay pot touched the floor. A servant stepped softly across the courtyard carrying water from a nearby fountain. The city smelled different in those early moments. The heat had not yet risen from the stones. The air carried traces of smoke, damp earth, stale wine, and baking bread beginning somewhere nearby. Families rose early because work began early. Laborers, builders, merchants, bakers, fishermen, laundresses, and scribes all depended on the cooler morning hours before the midday heat became too strong. In one narrow apartment above a noisy street, a Roman mother carefully shook sleep from her youngest son. The child rubbed his eyes while still wrapped in a thin wool blanket. He could hear neighbors already moving behind the walls. Someone downstairs coughed heavily. Somewhere nearby, a baby cried softly. Breakfast was usually small and plain. A piece of bread. Olives if the family could afford them. Sometimes cheese. Sometimes leftover beans from the previous evening. Water mixed with wine was common even in the morning because clean drinking water was not always easy to trust. The father tied simple leather straps around his sandals while chewing slowly on coarse bread. He spoke little this early in the day. His hands were rough from years of labor. Tiny white scars crossed his knuckles from tools, rope, and stone. The mother worked quietly beside the small cooking fire. She moved carefully in the dim light, already thinking about the long hours ahead. Roman homes required constant work. Water had to be carried. Clothing had to be washed by hand. Grain needed grinding. Bread needed baking. Floors gathered dust quickly from the dry roads outside. Nothing stayed clean for very long in ancient Rome. As the sky slowly brightened, more sounds entered the streets. Doors opened one after another. Vendors rolled carts over stone roads. Donkeys snorted impatiently. The smell of fresh bread drifted from bakeries where workers had already been awake for many hours. Roman bakeries were hot places long before sunrise. Inside, men covered in flour pushed heavy dough into large ovens fed by burning wood. The air was thick with smoke and heat. Sweat rolled down tired faces before the morning had even fully begun. Bread was one of the centerpieces of Roman life. Rich or poor, nearly everyone depended on it. The smell of warm bread traveled through neighborhoods every morning, mixing with smoke, animals, sewage, and the heavy scent of crowded human life. Children often carried small loaves home through busy streets while trying not to stumble on uneven stones. In wealthier homes, mornings unfolded more slowly. Large villas remained cool beneath shaded courtyards and painted walls. Water trickled quietly in decorative pools. Servants moved softly through long halls carrying trays of fruit, bread, and watered wine. But even wealthy Roman households followed routines shaped by family duty. Fathers held authority over the household. Roman law gave them enormous control over wives, children, servants, and property. Yet daily family life often depended more on habit, personality, exhaustion, and affection than strict law alone. A wealthy Roman mother might supervise servants while spinning wool beside an open courtyard. Her children studied reading and writing with tutors nearby. The soft scratching of reed pens echoed against painted walls. Outside the villa gates, ordinary workers already filled the roads. Builders carried stone beneath the rising sun. Fishermen returned from rivers and coastlines with damp nets resting heavily on tired shoulders. Merchants arranged jars of oil, baskets of figs, clay lamps, and folded cloth beneath shaded awnings. And everywhere, families moved together through the rhythm of daily survival. Many Roman homes were small and crowded. Entire families sometimes slept together in a single room. At night, thin mattresses stuffed with straw were spread across the floor. The smell of smoke clung to blankets and walls. In summer, the heat could become almost unbearable. Open windows helped little. The streets below remained noisy long after sunset. Drunken voices drifted upward from taverns. Carts rattled over stone roads. Dogs barked. Babies cried. Somewhere always, someone argued. And yet families adapted to this life because it was the only life they knew. Children learned early how to exist within crowded spaces. They learned how to carry water jars without dropping them. They learned how to stay clear of wagons and animals in narrow streets. They learned how to help prepare food, clean clothing, care for younger siblings, and obey the needs of the household. For many Roman children, play existed only in small quiet moments between responsibilities. A young girl might pause beside a doorway to play with a cloth doll stuffed with wool. A boy might roll small carved bones across the dusty ground while waiting for his father to finish work. Laughter existed, but often briefly, slipping between long hours of labor and routine. Education depended greatly on wealth. Some children studied literature, poetry, mathematics, and rhetoric. Others never learned to read at all. A boy born into a wealthy Roman family might spend hours reciting passages while his tutor corrected pronunciation in a shaded courtyard. His fingers would ache from practicing letters on wax tablets beneath the afternoon heat. Meanwhile, a poor child across the city might spend those same hours carrying water, cleaning fish, or helping load sacks of grain near the river docks. The city itself never truly rested. Rome was enormous. Streets twisted through crowded neighborhoods packed tightly with apartment buildings called insulae. These buildings leaned dangerously over narrow roads. Wooden staircases creaked beneath constant footsteps. Fires were common. Smoke drifted through upper floors where poor families often lived in cramped rented rooms beneath the rooftops. The higher a family lived, the harder daily life became. Water had to be carried up endless stairs. Heat gathered heavily beneath the roofs. Cooking fires made rooms even hotter. During summer nights, many people struggled to sleep. A tired laborer might lie awake listening to the distant noise of taverns while sweat dampened his thin blanket. Mosquitoes drifted through open windows. Somewhere nearby, a neighbor coughed deep into the darkness. And still, before dawn arrived, the city would wake again. Roman family life revolved around routine more than comfort. Laundry alone demanded enormous effort. Clothing was washed in large public laundries where workers stood for hours in tubs filled with water, ash, and urine, which Romans used for cleaning cloth. The smell was harsh and unpleasant. Workers stomped fabric beneath tired feet while steam rose around them. At home, mothers repaired torn tunics by lamplight after long days already filled with labor. Clothing was valuable. Most families owned very little. Fabric required time, skill, and money. Tunics were patched again and again until they nearly fell apart. Even simple meals demanded effort. Grain had to be ground by hand into flour. Bread dough required kneading and careful baking. Vegetables needed cleaning. Fires needed tending constantly. Smoke filled kitchens and darkened ceilings over time. In poorer homes, meals were often repetitive and plain. Beans, bread, porridge, onions, olives. Meat was rare for many families. Still, evening meals carried quiet importance. As darkness settled over the city, families gathered together after the long heat of the day. Oil lamps glowed softly against rough walls. Shadows moved gently across small rooms. Tired voices spoke quietly while bowls passed from hand to hand. Outside, the street slowly cooled. Sometimes a father returned home exhausted from construction work near one of Rome's great public buildings. Dust covered his hair and shoulders. His muscles trembled from lifting stone beneath the blazing sun. He might sit silently for several minutes before eating, simply grateful to rest his body. Children often fell asleep nearby while adults still talked softly in the fading light. For slaves within Roman households, life followed different rhythms. Some slaves worked endlessly with little rest. Others became deeply connected to the families they served, especially those who cared for children, cooked meals, or managed household tasks for many years. Roman slavery was woven deeply into daily life. Enslaved people cleaned homes, carried water, taught children, farmed fields, prepared food, and managed businesses. Some slept on simple mats near kitchens or storage rooms. Others rested in tiny spaces beneath staircases or beside work areas. Their days began before everyone else and ended after everyone else slept. In large villas outside the city, life moved according to farming seasons. The countryside surrounding Rome stretched across dusty roads, vineyards, olive groves, and grain fields that shimmered beneath the hot wind. Farm families woke while stars still filled the sky. Roosters cried into the cool darkness. Workers stepped into sandals stiff with dried mud. Morning mists sometimes drifted low across fields before the heat arrived. Farm labor was slow and exhausting. Men guided wooden plows through hard earth behind oxen. Women gathered olives beneath trees while children carried baskets through dry grass buzzing with insects. The smell of crushed olives, warm soil, sweat, and distant smoke filled the countryside. At midday, work often paused beneath the strongest heat. Workers rested beneath sparse shade, eating bread, figs, or cheese while dust clung to sweaty skin. Silence sometimes settled heavily over the fields during these hours. Even birds grew quiet in the burning afternoon air. Then work resumed again. Roman family life depended deeply on cooperation. Every person inside a household carried responsibilities. Survival required constant labor. Evenings in the countryside felt different from the crowded city. After sunset, darkness arrived quickly across the fields. Oil lamps flickered softly inside mud brick homes. Crickets sang in the dry grass. Far away, dogs guarded livestock through the night. Families gathered near cooking fires while smoke drifted slowly upward into wooden rafters. The air cooled little by little. Children listened sleepily to the quiet voices of adults discussing weather, crops, taxes, or news from nearby towns. Some leaned against tired parents while fighting heavy eyelids. Beyond the farms, rivers moved silently through the darkness. Water shaped Roman life in countless ways. Public fountains supplied neighborhoods with water carried through aqueducts stretching across the land. Women and servants spent hours collecting and carrying heavy jars home each day. The sound of flowing water became part of daily existence. At public baths, families washed away dust and sweat beneath warm clouds of steam. Bathhouses were not only places for cleaning but also spaces for conversation, routine, and brief escape from crowded homes. Inside the baths, voices echoed softly against stone walls. Water splashed gently into pools. Warm air carried the scent of oil, damp stone, and smoke from heating fires beneath the floors. Children laughed quietly in shallow water while tired workers soaked aching muscles after long days. Bathhouses glowed warmly during the evening hours. Oil lamps reflected across rippling pools. Outside, darkness deepened over the city streets. Back inside crowded apartment buildings, families prepared for sleep. The smallest children often slept first. Mothers covered them with thin blankets while whispering softly nearby. Fathers checked doors and extinguished lamps one by one to save precious oil. Night in Rome was never fully silent. Somewhere in the darkness, footsteps always echoed along stone roads. Tavern voices drifted through open windows. A donkey brayed. Water dripped slowly from fountains into worn basins. And beneath all these sounds, countless ordinary Roman families rested together after another long day beneath the ancient sky. The moonlight touched rooftops, temples, alleyways, markets, and sleeping courtyards alike. Inside one modest home, a grandmother lay awake beside fading lamplight. Her hands, bent from years of grinding grain and washing cloth, rested quietly across her blanket. She listened to the breathing of grandchildren sleeping nearby. The city around her felt endless. She had watched Rome change slowly through the years. New buildings rising. Old neighbors disappearing. Children growing into workers and parents themselves. Yet family routines remained familiar. Morning bread. Dusty streets. Sweeping floors. Carrying water. Mending clothes. Waiting for cooler evening air after the long heat of day. The simple rhythms continued generation after generation beneath the same drifting stars. And slowly, through the deepening night, Rome itself seemed to breathe more softly. Before the first pale light touched the rooftops of Rome, the city already stirred beneath the darkness. The night air still carried a trace of coolness, though the warmth of yesterday remained trapped inside stone walls and narrow alleyways. In the upper rooms of crowded apartment buildings, families shifted beneath thin blankets as distant footsteps echoed softly below. A cart rolled slowly over uneven stones somewhere far down the street. The sound was gentle at first, almost dreamlike, then faded again into the quiet. In a small room near the edge of the city, a woman opened her eyes before dawn. For a moment she remained still, listening to the sleeping breaths around her. Her youngest child slept beside her on a straw mattress. Beyond him, against the opposite wall, her husband rested heavily after another long day carrying bricks at a construction site near the Forum. The room smelled faintly of smoke, dust, olive oil, and old wood warmed by many summers. She sat up slowly so the mattress would not creak too loudly. Her feet touched the cool floor. Nearby, a clay lamp still glowed weakly from the night before, its flame trembling low inside darkened oil. Outside the window, the sky remained deep blue. These quiet moments before sunrise were often the calmest part of a Roman family's day. Soon the streets would fill with noise. Vendors would shout. Animals would crowd the roads. Workshops would ring with hammer blows and scraping tools. But for now, there was only stillness. The woman wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and moved quietly toward the cooking area. Her hands already knew each movement without thought. She added oil to the lamp. She checked yesterday's bread. She stirred ashes beneath the small cooking fire. Soon she would wake the children. Soon the long day would begin again. Across the city, thousands of other Roman families moved through the same familiar rhythm. In wealthier homes, servants crossed open courtyards carrying water jars while the household still slept. In poorer neighborhoods, laborers prepared to leave before sunrise so they could reach work while the streets were cooler. The city woke in layers. First came bakers. In the dim early hours, ovens already burned bright inside cramped bakeries. Men with tired eyes kneaded heavy dough beneath hanging lamps while flour drifted softly through warm air. The heat inside these bakeries became intense even before dawn fully arrived. Wood crackled beneath clay ovens. Sweat gathered on foreheads. Hands pressed dough again and again across worn wooden tables. Outside, the smell of fresh bread slowly spread through nearby streets. Soon after came water carriers. Although aqueducts brought water into Rome from faraway hills and springs, many families still needed to collect it daily from fountains or public basins. Some homes had no direct access at all. Women, children, servants, and hired workers balanced clay jars against their hips or shoulders while waiting patiently in growing lines. Water splashed gently into stone troughs beneath the fading stars. Voices remained soft this early in the morning. Many people were still half asleep. Yawns mixed with quiet conversation. Sandals scraped slowly against stone pavement worn smooth by countless footsteps over generations. A boy no older than 10 struggled to lift a full water jar while his older sister steadied it beside him. Their mother waited nearby, tired already before the day had truly begun. The boy's arms trembled beneath the weight. Water was heavy. Everything in Roman life required carrying something. Water, grain, firewood, laundry, clay pots, stones, baskets of olives, fish from the market. Endless loads lifted and moved beneath the steady sun. Even children grew strong from labor very early in life. As dawn brightened the eastern sky, sunlight slowly entered the narrow streets between apartment buildings. Dust floated in warm golden beams. Pigeons fluttered across rooftops searching for scraps. The city was awake now. Merchants arranged goods beneath awnings outside small shops. Fishmongers unpacked their morning catch onto wet tables while flies gathered quickly in the warming air. Potters displayed bowls and jars beside crowded roads. Cloth sellers shook dust from folded fabrics. Everywhere, families worked together. A father measured grain while his daughter kept track of customers. A mother sold vegetables beside her sons carrying baskets from a nearby cart. Brothers repaired sandals beneath the shade of a faded awning while their grandmother watched the street from a stool nearby. Family businesses were common throughout Rome. Work and home often existed in the same cramped space. Shops occupied lower floors while entire families slept above them in small rooms reached by steep wooden stairs. The smell of business became the smell of daily life. Fresh bread mixed with fish, smoke, animals, sweat, wet wool, olive oil, sewage, and dust heated beneath the growing sun. Rome was crowded beyond what many could comfortably endure. Yet people adapted because there was little choice. Children played in alleys between deliveries and labor. Elderly neighbors sat outside doorways watching the constant movement of the streets. Servants hurried through crowds carrying messages or supplies for wealthy households. And above everything rose the sounds of the city itself. Hammering from workshops. Voices calling prices. Footsteps on stone. The splash of fountains. The rumble of wagon wheels. The distant barking of dogs. In wealthier districts, life unfolded more slowly behind private walls. Inside large Roman villas, courtyards remained shaded and cool beneath painted columns. Water trickled gently into decorative pools surrounded by flowers and carefully trimmed plants. Marble floors reflected soft morning light. Yet even here, family life followed careful routines. Children of wealthy families often spent mornings studying. Tutors taught reading, writing, poetry, history, and public speaking. Boys practiced speeches while pacing beneath shaded walkways. Girls learned household management, weaving, music, and literacy depending on their family's customs. A young Roman boy traced letters into wax with a metal stylus while fighting sleep in the warm morning air. Nearby, his tutor recited lines of poetry slowly and patiently. The boy's younger sister sat beside her mother spinning wool into thread. The soft turning motion repeated endlessly in the quiet courtyard. Roman homes relied heavily on fabric work. Spinning, weaving, sewing, washing, and repairing clothing consumed countless hours. Even wealthy households spent much of daily life managing cloth and garments. Tunics wore thin quickly beneath hard labor and heat. Sandals broke often. Blankets gathered smoke and dust. Nothing remained fresh for long. Meanwhile, in the poorer neighborhoods near the river, life felt harsher. The Tiber River flowed steadily beside the city, carrying boats, trade goods, waste, and muddy water beneath the warm sky. Fishermen untangled damp nets while dock workers unloaded grain shipments from distant provinces. The smell near the river was strong. Wet wood, fish, mud, smoke. Rotting refuse drifting in slow water. Men bent beneath sacks of grain that pressed heavily into tired shoulders. Their backs ached constantly from labor. Sweat darkened their tunics before midday. Nearby, women washed clothing against stones while children splashed barefoot at the water's edge. River life shaped many Roman families. Some earned their living entirely from its movement. Boatmen guided cargo through shifting currents. Fishermen rose long before dawn to cast nets into dark water. Merchants depended on river trade to stock city markets with food and supplies. And always, the river moved onward beneath bridges crowded with footsteps. By midday, the heat settled heavily over Rome. Stone streets reflected sunlight upward. Dust clung to sweaty skin. Air inside workshops became thick and difficult to breathe. Labor slowed beneath the hottest hours. In construction areas, workers rested briefly beside unfinished walls and towering columns. Some removed sandals to cool aching feet. Others sat silently chewing bread while staring into the brightness shimmering above the city. A builder wiped sweat from his face with rough cloth stained white from stone dust. His hands trembled slightly from exhaustion. Roman construction never seemed to end. Temples, bathhouses, roads, aqueducts, markets, villas, and monuments constantly expanded the city. Thousands of workers shaped Rome stone by stone beneath relentless sunlight. Most of them would never be remembered. Their names vanished quietly into history. But their daily lives filled the city with movement and labor from dawn until darkness. In homes across Rome, the afternoon hours often became quieter. Younger children slept during the worst heat while mothers prepared evening meals or repaired clothing in shaded corners. Some families closed shutters to keep sunlight outside. Inside dim rooms, air hung warm and still. A grandmother shelled beans slowly beside an open doorway while flies drifted lazily through the heat. Nearby, an infant slept softly against folded linen cloth. The older woman's hands moved automatically after decades of repetition. Family life in ancient Rome often centered around endurance. People endured crowded rooms, illness, heat, smoke, sore muscles, hunger, and uncertainty with quiet persistence. Sickness visited homes frequently. Fevers spread quickly through packed neighborhoods. Dirty water and poor sanitation caused constant danger, especially among poorer families living in crowded insulae. Children often became ill during hot summers when flies and heat worsened conditions. Roman medicine existed, but it could do little against many illnesses. Families relied heavily on herbs, oils, prayers, warm cloths, and patience. In one narrow apartment, a mother sat beside her sick child while evening shadows slowly lengthened across the walls. She dipped cloth into cool water and pressed it gently against the boy's forehead. Outside, the city continued moving without pause. Inside, time slowed. The child slept restlessly while the oil lamp flickered nearby. His mother listened to every breath. Night eventually brought some relief from the heat. As the sun lowered behind Rome's hills, long shadows stretched across streets and courtyards. The air cooled little by little. Workers returned home carrying tools, baskets, or empty jars after another exhausting day. The evening meal became the center of family gathering. In modest homes, supper remained simple. Bread dipped in oil. Lentils cooked slowly in clay pots. Olives, onions. Sometimes small fish or bits of cheese if the family had enough money. Families sat closely together while lamps glowed softly against darkening walls. Children spoke sleepily about the day. Fathers rubbed sore shoulders. Mothers portioned food carefully so everyone received enough. Outside, taverns filled with tired workers escaping crowded homes for a little while. Laughter drifted into the streets alongside music played softly on pipes or stringed instruments. But many families remained indoors. Evenings offered rare moments of rest. Some older relatives told stories quietly beside the lamp while children leaned against them with heavy eyes. Others repaired tools or folded laundry in peaceful silence. In wealthier homes, dinners lasted longer and included more dishes. Roasted meats, fruits, wine, vegetables, sauces, and sweets covered large tables surrounded by reclining guests. Yet even wealthy Roman households experienced ordinary family moments beneath the luxury. Children still grew sleepy before meals ended. Parents still worried over illness. Old age still brought aching joints and fading strength. A wealthy Roman mother might pause beside a sleeping child's bed with the same tenderness found in the poorest apartment across the city. Human routines crossed every social class. As darkness deepened fully over Rome, oil lamps became scattered points of golden light behind windows and doorways. Smoke drifted slowly upward into the night sky. The city softened again. Bathhouses emptied gradually. Markets closed. Merchants covered goods with cloth. Stray dogs wandered through cooling streets searching for scraps. Far above the city, stars appeared one by one. In the countryside beyond Rome, farm families finished evening chores beneath fading twilight. Animals settled into pens. Crickets filled dry fields with gentle sound. Inside small rural homes, bread baked slowly beside cooking fires while tired workers rested aching feet after long days harvesting grain or tending vines. The countryside smelled of earth cooling after heat. Dust settled softly over quiet roads. A farmer sat outside his doorway watching darkness spread across distant hills. His young daughter leaned sleepily against his shoulder while night insects sang around them. Tomorrow would bring another day exactly like this one. Another dawn. Another long stretch of labor beneath the sun. Another evening of tired conversation beside dim firelight. Roman family life moved forward through these repeated cycles. Days blended together beneath changing seasons. Children became adults. Parents became grandparents. New infants arrived while older generations quietly disappeared. And still the routines continued. Inside the crowded city, one by one, lamps were extinguished. Rooms grew darker. Voices faded. A final cart rattled through the night streets before silence slowly settled once more across ancient Rome. Deep into the night, long after most lamps had gone dark, Rome rested beneath a blanket of warm silence that never became completely still. The city always breathed softly in the darkness. Somewhere beyond the sleeping neighborhoods, water continued to spill gently from fountains into stone basins. A distant horse stamped against the ground. Wind moved lightly through narrow alleys carrying the fading smell of smoke and dust. In the upper room of a crowded apartment building, a small child stirred in sleep. The room was close and warm. 4 people rested together beneath thin wool blankets spread across straw mattresses. Moonlight slipped through wooden shutters and painted pale shapes across the floor. The father slept near the doorway, one arm resting over tired eyes. His hands were rough even in sleep, hardened by years of hauling stone and timber beneath the Roman sun. Beside him, his wife remained half awake. Many Roman mothers slept lightly. The noise of crowded buildings never fully disappeared. Babies cried during the night. Neighbors argued through thin walls. Footsteps creaked endlessly on wooden staircases. Somewhere below, drunken voices drifted from the street before fading again into silence. The woman listened carefully for a moment. Only breathing now. Only the distant sound of water outside. She closed her eyes again while the city rested around her. In another part of Rome, near one of the busy marketplaces, a baker's household had already begun waking before dawn. Their days started earlier than most. The family lived beside the bakery itself in a cramped series of rooms darkened by years of smoke. The father sat up slowly from his mattress while the stars still shone overhead. His bones ached immediately. He had spent nearly 20 years working beside hot ovens. The heat never truly left his body anymore. Even during cool nights, his skin remained warm from endless labor beside fire. Quietly, he pulled on his tunic and crossed the room without waking the children sleeping nearby. Outside the bakery, the street remained mostly empty. The stones still held traces of yesterday's heat beneath bare feet and worn sandals. The baker inhaled deeply before unlocking the heavy wooden doors. Inside waited darkness, flour dust, and silence. Soon the ovens would roar again. Soon the bakery would glow orange with firelight while dough rose beneath tired hands. He lit a small oil lamp and began the familiar work. Everything in Roman family life depended on repetition. The same gestures repeated every day. Grinding grain. Sweeping floors. Carrying water. Repairing clothing. Lighting lamps. Preparing bread. Walking the same streets. Opening the same shop doors. The rhythm became so familiar that many tasks required almost no thought at all. Bodies moved from memory. Hands learned their work until even exhaustion could not interrupt it. As dawn slowly approached, pale gray light crept across rooftops and temple walls. Birds fluttered awake among narrow courtyards. The city began stirring once more beneath the cooling sky. In wealthy villas, servants moved quietly through long hallways before sunrise. One young servant girl carried fresh water into the household kitchen while fighting sleep. She had been brought to Rome years earlier from a distant province and now spent her days washing dishes, grinding herbs, cleaning lamps, and carrying messages through the house. She worked silently so she would not wake the family too early. The villa itself still rested in shadow. Marble columns stood cool in the dim light. Water shimmered faintly in the courtyard fountain. Somewhere beyond the walls, faint market noises already drifted into the morning air. The servant girl paused briefly near the courtyard. For a moment she simply listened. The fountain. The soft rustling of leaves. The first wagon wheels far away on stone roads. Then she returned to work. Servants and enslaved workers formed the unseen structure beneath many Roman households. Meals appeared because someone prepared them. Clothing remained repaired because someone stitched it carefully by lamplight. Floors stayed clean because someone swept away dust again and again. Even wealthy children understood this rhythm from an early age. A Roman boy living inside a large villa awoke slowly beneath linen blankets while sunlight touched painted walls around him. Somewhere nearby, servants were already preparing breakfast. His tutor would arrive soon for lessons in reading and rhetoric. But for now he remained still, listening to morning sounds drifting through the open courtyard. Birdsong. Running water. Distant voices outside the villa walls. The smell of warm bread beginning in the kitchens below. Roman homes often centered around courtyards open to the sky. These spaces brought light, air, and rainwater into the middle of the house. During quiet morning hours, they became peaceful places where family members gathered before the day fully unfolded. A mother might sit spinning wool while servants swept nearby. Children might chase each other briefly across cool stone floors before lessons began. Older relatives sometimes rested quietly near fountains while sunlight slowly filled the courtyard. These small moments of calm existed between long stretches of duty and labor. Outside the villa walls, however, the city had fully awakened. Morning crowds thickened through the streets as merchants opened shops and workers hurried toward construction sites, markets, docks, and workshops. Dust rose beneath hundreds of sandals. Voices echoed between tall apartment buildings leaning over narrow roads. Rome could feel overwhelming even to those born there. The streets pressed tightly together. Animals crowded beside wagons and pedestrians. Smells changed from one corner to the next. Fresh bread. Fish. Smoke. Human sweat. Wet wool. Olive oil. Rotting refuse left beside overflowing drains. And still, life continued through the movement of families trying to survive another day. Near the forum, a father walked beside his young son through the growing crowds. The boy carried a small basket filled with tools for his father's repair stall. He struggled to keep pace while avoiding puddles, carts, and hurried strangers brushing past. The father slowed occasionally so the child could catch up. They passed marble temples glowing softly beneath morning sunlight. Senators in white togas crossed busy streets while ordinary laborers stepped aside respectfully. Nearby, street vendors already shouted prices over baskets of fruit and vegetables. The boy looked everywhere at once. Rome felt endless to children. Every street offered new sounds and faces. Soldiers marching in formation. Foreign traders speaking unfamiliar languages. Beggars sitting quietly beside public fountains. Musicians playing pipes near crowded intersections. Life in the city taught children quickly how to observe and adapt. A young girl helping her mother sell vegetables learned how to judge customers by expression and posture. A fisherman's son learned how weather changed river currents before storms arrived. Children of craftsmen often inherited their parents' skills through years of simple observation. Knowledge passed quietly through families. Not through books alone, but through repetition. Through hands guiding smaller hands. Through daily routines performed together year after year. In one small workshop near the edge of the city, an elderly sandal maker sat beside his grandson shaping leather strips in the morning light. The old man's eyesight had faded with age, but his fingers still understood the work perfectly. The boy watched carefully. Outside, customers moved past the doorway while heat slowly gathered in the street. The old man spoke softly as he worked, explaining how leather changed after rain, how straps stretched with time, how poor stitching could wound tired feet during long walks across stone roads. The grandson listened while trying to copy each movement. These quiet lessons filled Roman family life. Mothers teaching daughters how to knead bread dough. Fathers teaching sons how to sharpen tools. Grandparents sharing stories beside evening lamps. Older siblings carrying infants while younger children watched and learned. The family itself became a place of survival, instruction, and comfort within the crowded uncertainty of Roman life. As the morning passed, the sun climbed higher above the city. Heat settled heavily across rooftops and marketplaces. Stone walls absorbed sunlight until they almost seemed to glow. Workers wiped sweat from their necks while continuing endless labor beneath the bright sky. In laundries, steam rose thick into the air as workers stomped clothing inside large basins. Wet fabric slapped heavily against stone surfaces. The smell there was strong enough to sting the eyes. Laundry work exhausted the body quickly. Women and enslaved workers bent over water for hours scrubbing dirt from tunics and blankets stained by labor, smoke, and crowded living. Nearby, children carried baskets of cleaned clothing through hot streets while flies circled lazily overhead. At midday, many Romans searched for shade whenever possible. Markets slowed slightly during the worst heat. Some merchants stretched cloth overhead to block sunlight from goods and customers alike. Workers rested briefly against walls while chewing bread or figs in tired silence. The city seemed to shimmer beneath the brightness. Even animals slowed. Dogs slept beneath carts. Donkeys stood motionless with lowered heads. Pigeons gathered around fountains where water cooled the air. Inside crowded apartments, the heat became difficult to escape. Upper floors trapped warm air beneath rooftops baked all morning by the sun. Small windows offered little relief. Families sometimes hung damp cloth near openings hoping to cool the room slightly. Children became restless and sweaty. Mothers fanned sleeping infants gently while preparing afternoon meals. An elderly woman sat motionless beside an open window, conserving energy during the hottest part of the day. Her joints hurt more in summer heat. She watched dust drift slowly through sunlight while distant street noise echoed below. Life slowed during these hours. but it never fully stopped. At the river docks, unloading ships continued despite the heat. Grain shipments fed the city and could not wait for cooler weather. Men strained beneath heavy sacks while foremen shouted instructions across crowded piers. The Tiber River reflected bright sunlight in blinding ripples. Fishermen repaired nets beside the muddy banks while children searched shallow water for dropped coins or scraps of useful metal. River smells rose heavily into the warm air. Mud, fish, wet rope, rotting wood, smoke drifting from riverside workshops. The river was both lifeline and burden for Rome. It carried food, trade, and water into the city, yet it also carried waste and sickness through crowded neighborhoods. Families living near the river understood its moods closely. Floods sometimes entered homes without warning during storm seasons. Mud covered floors and ruined belongings. Families cleaned carefully afterward, salvaging whatever they could. Then life continued again. Roman families became skilled at continuing, at enduring discomfort, at rebuilding routines after hardship, at finding ordinary peace inside difficult conditions. As afternoon slowly faded toward evening, cooler air finally began returning to the city. Shadows lengthened across streets and courtyards. Workers started their journeys home carrying tools, baskets, or leftover goods from market stalls. Bathhouses filled gradually with tired bodies seeking relief from dust and sweat. Inside the baths, steam drifted through warm rooms glowing softly with lamplight. Conversations echoed gently against stone walls while water splashed quietly nearby. For many Romans, bathing marked the transition from labor to rest. A father soaked sore muscles while discussing grain prices with neighbors. Young boys laughed softly in shallow pools. Elderly men sat wrapped in towels speaking slowly about politics, weather, and aging bodies. Outside, the sky deepened into soft gold above the rooftops. Families reunited for the evening meal. Cooking fires flickered inside homes throughout the city. The smell of lentils, onions, garlic, herbs, and baking bread drifted into the cooling air. Children returned from errands or apprenticeships dusty and tired. One small family gathered on the rooftop of their apartment building where evening breezes offered relief from the trapped heat below. They sat close together sharing bread, olives, and watered wine while watching sunlight fade over distant hills. Nearby rooftops held other families doing the same. Quiet conversations floated gently across the growing darkness. Below them, Rome continued moving. Yet above the streets, beneath the first appearing stars, these simple family moments felt calm and protected from the endless noise of the city. A mother brushed dust from her daughter's hair. A grandfather closed tired eyes beside the warm evening breeze. A small child fell asleep against his father's shoulder before supper had fully ended. And little by little, as lamps began glowing once more behind windows and doorways, ancient Rome softened again into night. Night settled slowly across Rome, not all at once, but in layers of fading sound and dimming light. The last orange glow of sunset disappeared behind distant hills while shadows stretched through courtyards, marketplaces, and narrow streets paved smooth by generations of footsteps. One by one, lamps flickered alive behind wooden shutters. Their small flames glowed softly against plaster walls darkened by smoke and time. In the crowded neighborhoods near the center of the city, families prepared for another warm evening together inside rooms that still held the day's heat. Windows remained open where they could be, though the air drifting inside carried dust, cooking smoke, and the endless smells of the city. Somewhere nearby, lentils simmered slowly inside a clay pot. Elsewhere, bread crackled gently beside a small fire. The sounds of supper drifted softly through the apartment buildings. Bowls touching tables. Quiet conversation. A tired cough from behind a thin wall. A child laughing briefly before sleepiness returned again. Inside one narrow apartment on an upper floor, a father sat cross-legged near the doorway while carefully repairing a broken sandal strap by lamplight. His youngest daughter rested beside him with her head against his shoulder. She watched his hands move slowly through the leather while fighting heavy eyelids. The room was simple. A small table. A few clay bowls. Folded blankets stacked near the wall. A wooden chest holding the family's clothing and valuables. Nothing unnecessary. Most Roman families owned very little. Every object inside the home carried purpose because space itself was precious. A broken bowl might be repaired many times before being thrown away. Old clothing became patches for newer clothing. Worn blankets were reused until the fabric nearly disappeared. Life required careful use of everything. The father finished tying the leather strap and tested it gently between his hands. Satisfied, he set the sandal aside and reached for a piece of bread from the evening meal. Outside the window, the city continued murmuring softly in the darkness. Far below, a wagon rolled through the street carrying late deliveries toward the market district. The wheels rattled over uneven stones while the driver called quietly to his animals. Then the sounds faded again into the night. Roman evenings often brought a brief feeling of relief after the long labor of the day. Heat slowly lifted from the streets. The air became easier to breathe. Families gathered together in ways that daylight hours rarely allowed. In wealthier homes, evening could feel almost peaceful. Inside large villas, servants lit rows of lamps along painted hallways while cool water reflected moonlight inside open courtyards. Dinner guests reclined on cushioned couches while musicians played softly nearby. Wine mixed with honey or herbs was poured into delicate cups. Yet beyond the polished marble and painted walls, ordinary family moments still unfolded quietly. A wealthy Roman mother walked slowly through the household checking on sleeping children before joining the evening meal. One boy had fallen asleep over his studies earlier, wax tablet still resting beside him. His younger sister clutched a cloth doll while breathing softly beneath linen blankets. The mother adjusted the blanket gently before leaving the room. Even among wealthy families, life centered around routine and responsibility more than luxury alone. Children were expected to prepare for adult life early. Boys studied for future public duties or business responsibilities. Girls learned household management, weaving, organization, and social customs expected within Roman society. Family reputation mattered deeply. Parents worried constantly about behavior, marriages, finances, and the future stability of the household. These concerns rested quietly beneath daily routines like stones beneath river water. Meanwhile, outside the villas and public buildings, poorer families faced very different evenings. In the crowded insulae, heat remained trapped inside upper rooms long after sunset. Families often climbed onto rooftops searching for cooler air. Some brought blankets outside during the hottest months and slept beneath the open sky. From above, the city looked endless at night. Thousands of tiny lamps flickered across the darkness like scattered stars fallen onto earth. Smoke drifted upward from cooking fires. Voices floated softly through warm air. Dogs barked somewhere far away. On one rooftop, an elderly couple sat side by side sharing figs from a small wooden bowl. They spoke little after many decades together. Conversation no longer needed many words. Below them, Rome moved endlessly through the darkness. The old man rubbed tired knees while watching torchlight pass through the streets beneath them. His wife folded worn clothing beside him with slow practiced movements. The night breeze touched their faces gently. For a few quiet moments, the city felt almost calm. Far from the crowded center of Rome, in smaller towns and countryside villas, evenings unfolded more slowly. Beyond the city walls stretched farms, vineyards, orchards, and dusty roads winding through dry hills and open fields. Farm families finished their work before darkness fully arrived. Animals were fed and secured. Tools were stored carefully away from weather and thieves. Then, little by little, silence spread across the countryside. A farmer washed dust from his arms beside a water basin while his wife prepared a stew of beans and onions over a low fire. Their children sat nearby whispering quietly while insects hummed beyond the doorway. The smell of warm earth drifted through the cooling air. Olive trees stood dark against the deepening sky. The countryside carried its own rhythm separate from the city. Fewer crowds. Fewer voices. More wind. More distance between homes. Nights could feel peaceful there, though also lonely. Families depended heavily on one another in rural areas. Neighbors might live far apart along rough roads. During illness or harvest seasons, everyone worked together because survival demanded cooperation. A grandmother living on a small farm near the Tiber River spent her evenings spinning wool beside the fire while her grandchildren slept nearby. Her eyesight had weakened with age, yet her fingers still moved confidently through familiar work. Outside, frogs croaked near the riverbanks. The sound mixed gently with crickets singing in dry grass. She remembered many seasons. Flood years when the river rose into fields and homes. Drought years when crops failed beneath burning skies. Winters cold enough to freeze shallow water basins overnight. Yet through all those changing years, family routines remained steady. Meals prepared. Clothing repaired. Children raised. Fields planted. Lamps lit against the darkness. Back in Rome, nighttime work continued for many people. Bakers prepared dough for morning bread. Night watchmen walked slowly through shadowed streets carrying lamps and staffs. Their footsteps echoed softly between dark buildings while they listened for signs of fire, theft, or trouble. Fires frightened Rome more than almost anything else. Crowded wooden structures stood close together throughout much of the city. A single cooking accident could spread flames rapidly between homes and shops. Families often slept lightly because of this constant danger. At night, some fathers checked cooking fires repeatedly before resting. Some mothers kept water jars nearby while sleeping. The fear remained quiet but familiar. In one apartment building near the river district, a young mother soothed her crying infant while neighbors shifted irritably behind thin walls. The baby's small face glowed softly in lamplight while she rocked him against her shoulder. Outside the window, distant laughter drifted upward from a tavern below. The mother hummed quietly under her breath. Eventually the child settled. His breathing slowed. The mother leaned back against the wall, exhausted. Roman parenting demanded endless physical effort. Carrying children through crowded streets. Washing cloths by hand. Preparing meals while infants cried nearby. Comforting sick children through long nights without medicine that could truly help. Many parents carried grief quietly as well. Childhood sickness was common. Some children never reached adulthood. Families understood this painful uncertainty deeply, though they rarely spoke of it openly. Still, life continued forward. New children were born. Homes remained full of movement and noise. Mothers continued baking bread while fathers returned daily to labor. Grandparents shared stories beside evening fires. The cycle never truly stopped. Late into the night, Rome's taverns remained awake longer than family homes. Workers gathered after exhausting days to drink watered wine, escape crowded apartments, or share conversation beneath hanging lamps darkened by smoke. Inside one tavern near the marketplace, tired dock workers sat around rough wooden tables while discussing river shipments arriving from Egypt and distant provinces. Their hands were swollen from lifting cargo all day. Dust and sweat covered their tunics. Yet for a little while, they rested. A musician played softly in the corner. Wine cups touched gently against the table. Outside, the streets gradually emptied. The city softened again. Moonlight spread across temples and public squares. Marble columns glowed pale beneath the stars. Fountains continued their quiet flowing through the darkness. In the great public baths, fires burned low as workers cleaned floors and emptied water basins after the crowds departed. Steam faded slowly from the cooling rooms. Even these enormous spaces eventually became silent. Back inside family homes, sleep settled unevenly across the city. Some children dreamed peacefully despite crowded rooms and noisy streets. Some fathers snored heavily after days of labor beneath the sun. Some mothers remained awake longer, listening to the breathing of their families while planning tomorrow's work in tired silence. An old woman living alone near the edge of Rome sat beside her final lamp long after midnight. Her children had grown years earlier and moved into households of their own. Now her apartment felt very quiet at night. She folded a small piece of linen carefully into a wooden chest and paused. Outside, wind brushed softly along the narrow street below. She could hear distant footsteps somewhere in the darkness. Then only silence again. The lamp flame trembled gently beside her. For a long moment she simply watched it. Roman life moved quickly during daylight hours, but night revealed something slower beneath it all. Beneath the markets, labor, noise, and crowded streets existed countless private moments hidden inside small homes and tired families. Quiet conversations. Sleeping children. Old hands repairing worn cloth. Mothers waiting beside sick beds. Fathers resting sore muscles after long work days. Grandparents remembering younger years while listening to night sounds drifting through open windows. These ordinary moments formed the true rhythm of Roman family life. Not only the grand temples or triumphs remembered in history, but the softer world inside homes lit by oil lamps. The world of bread and dust. Water jars and worn sandals. Morning routines and evening exhaustion. And as the stars slowly crossed above ancient Rome, families everywhere drifted deeper into sleep while the city breathed quietly beneath the warm night sky. The hours before dawn were often the gentlest moments in ancient Rome. Darkness still covered the city, yet the hardest noise of the night had faded away. Taverns grew quieter. Wagons no longer rattled through the streets so often. Even the stray dogs resting beneath market tables had settled into sleep. Only small sounds remained now. The drip of water from a fountain. Wind brushing softly through a narrow alley. The distant creaking of wooden beams inside old apartment buildings. In one crowded insula near the grain market, a young boy opened his eyes while the room around him remained dark. For a few moments he did not move. He simply listened to the breathing of his family nearby. His little sister slept beside their mother beneath folded blankets. His father rested close to the doorway after returning late from unloading grain shipments near the river docks. The boy could smell yesterday's smoke still clinging to the room. Smoke from the cooking fire. Smoke from oil lamps. Smoke drifting through open windows from neighboring homes. The smell had soaked into blankets, clothing, walls, and hair over many years. Most Roman homes carried the scent constantly. The boy turned slowly onto his back and stared upward into the darkness. Soon his mother would wake. Soon the street outside would begin filling with footsteps again. Soon another day would begin beneath the warm Roman sky. But for now, everything remained still. In another part of the city, near one of Rome's public fountains, a widow was already awake preparing for the morning. She lived alone now in a small rented room after losing her husband many winters earlier to illness. Life had become quieter since then, though never easier. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stepped carefully onto the cold stone floor. Her joints ached before sunrise. Age settled heavily into Roman bodies. Years of labor left many people bent, stiff, and tired long before old age fully arrived. Carrying water, grinding grain, washing cloth, farming fields, and hauling materials beneath the sun slowly wore the body down. The widow lit a small lamp and prepared to collect water before the morning crowds arrived. Outside, the street smelled faintly of damp stone and cooling dust. The sky above Rome had begun to soften into deep gray. As she walked slowly toward the fountain carrying her clay jar, she passed sleeping doorways, shuttered shops, and silent market stalls waiting for daylight. Somewhere nearby, a rooster cried into the darkness. Another answered farther away. The city was beginning to wake. Public fountains stood at the center of daily Roman life. Water flowed constantly from aqueducts that crossed valleys and hills before reaching the city. Families gathered around fountains from dawn until evening carrying jars, washing vegetables, rinsing cloth, and exchanging news. By sunrise, lines would form quickly. But at this hour, only a few early risers waited quietly beside the flowing water. The widow filled her jar slowly while another woman nearby adjusted a sleeping infant against her shoulder. Neither spoke much. Morning tiredness still rested heavily over them both. The sound of water echoed gently against stone. Nearby, torchlight flickered faintly as a night watchman completed the final stretch of his route through the district. His sandals scraped softly across worn pavement. Soon his long night would end. Soon the bakers would fully take over the streets. Inside the bakeries, fires already burned bright. The heat inside those rooms became almost unbearable even before sunrise. Bakers worked stripped down to thin tunics darkened by sweat and flour. Dough-covered wooden tables while glowing ovens filled the air with smoke and dry heat. A young apprentice rubbed sleep from his eyes while carrying sacks of grain across the floor. His shoulders already hurt though the day had barely begun. The master baker shaped loaves beside him with quick practiced hands. Neither man spoke very much. The work itself created enough sound. Wood crackling beneath the ovens. Heavy dough pressing against tables. Clay trays scraping across stone. The steady breathing of tired workers moving through familiar routines. Outside the bakery doors, the smell of fresh bread slowly drifted into the awakening city. One by one, windows opened. Families stirred. Children rolled sleepily beneath blankets while mothers prepared morning meals beside small fires. Roman breakfasts were usually simple and quick. Bread remained the center of most meals for ordinary families. Some ate olives or cheese when possible. Others dipped dry bread into watered wine or olive oil before leaving for work. A laborer sitting beside his doorway tore bread into small pieces while stretching sore muscles from yesterday's work. Nearby, his oldest daughter braided her younger sister's hair before they both left to help at the family's market stall. The father watched the pale sun rise quietly for a moment. Morning light slowly reached across rooftops and temple walls. Rome was beautiful at this hour. The city had not yet become loud. The heat had not fully risen from the stones. Cool shadows still stretched through narrow streets while birds circled above the waking rooftops. For a little while, even the crowded neighborhoods felt calm. Then slowly, the movement began. Merchants opened shutters. Shopkeepers swept dust from doorways. Animals pulled carts into busy streets. Children hurried along alleyways carrying baskets or messages for their families. The great machine of Roman daily life started turning once more. Near the Forum, workers gathered at construction sites where unfinished buildings rose slowly above the city. Stonecutters sharpened tools. Carpenters lifted beams into place. Laborers carried heavy baskets filled with rubble beneath the strengthening sun. Roman construction demanded endless human effort. Men strained against ropes while foremen shouted instructions through clouds of dust. Sweat appeared quickly even in the cool morning air. A builder paused briefly beside a stack of marble blocks and rubbed his lower back with tired hands. Tiny white lines of stone dust covered his arms and beard. He had worked on buildings across Rome for most of his life. Bathhouses, temples, market walls, private villas. His labor existed everywhere in the city, though few people would ever know his name. This was true for countless Romans. History remembered emperors and generals. But ordinary families built the city itself. The bakers, the dock workers, the laundresses, the potters, the fishermen, the women grinding grain before sunrise, the fathers carrying stone through the heat, the children helping their families survive another difficult season. Their lives filled every street, every market, every crowded apartment throughout Rome. As morning passed toward midday, the city became warmer and louder. The smell of fish markets thickened in the heat. Vendors shouted over one another while flies gathered around tables piled with fresh catches from the river and coast. Nearby, Fruit sellers arranged figs, grapes, and dates beneath cloth awnings, casting small islands of shade across the streets. A mother carrying a basket of onions guided her children carefully through the crowds. "Stay close," she whispered softly. Children could disappear easily in Rome. The city swallowed people into movement and noise. Beggars rested beside fountains with hands extended toward passing strangers. Soldiers pushed through crowded roads wearing dusty sandals from long marches. Wealthy citizens traveled carried in litters while ordinary workers stepped aside to let them pass. Yet even among all this movement, family life continued quietly beneath the surface. A grandfather teaching his grandson to count coins at a market stall. A mother comforting a frightened child startled by shouting nearby. A father buying a small sweet cake for his daughter after a difficult morning of errands. Tiny moments of tenderness existed everywhere inside the crowded city. By midday, sunlight burned brightly over Rome. Stone walls reflected heat back into the streets. Air shimmered above rooftops. Dust clung to sweaty skin and damp clothing. Many workers slowed beneath the harshest heat if they could. Inside workshops, craftsmen wiped their faces and rested aching hands for a few brief moments. Potters shaped clay more slowly while warm air drifted through open doors. Blacksmiths worked beside roaring fires that made summer afternoons almost unbearable. The smell of hot metal mixed with smoke and sweat. Nearby, textile workers repaired torn clothing while seated near narrow windows hoping for even the slightest breeze. Roman homes also grew heavy with heat during these hours. Upper rooms trapped warm air beneath tiled roofs. Children became restless and sleepy. Mothers closed shutters against the brightness while continuing endless household tasks inside dim interiors. One woman sat grinding grain into flour using a heavy stone mill while sweat rolled slowly down her neck. The repetitive motion exhausted her arms, but the work could not wait. Bread needed preparing. Always bread. The sound of grinding stone echoed softly through the room while her youngest son slept nearby on a folded blanket. Outside, cicadas hummed in the burning afternoon air. In wealthier homes, servants carried cool water into shaded dining rooms while family members escaped the worst heat inside thick stone walls. Yet even there, the atmosphere remained slow and drowsy during summer afternoons. A Roman senator reclined quietly beside an open courtyard while reading a scroll half-heartedly. Nearby, his wife instructed servants preparing the evening meal. Their small daughter chased a pet bird briefly across the mosaic floor before growing tired from the warmth. Even privileged lives moved according to weather, exhaustion, and routine. As the afternoon slowly softened toward evening, shadows lengthened once more across the city streets. The worst heat began to fade. Workers looked toward home. At the river docks, men finished unloading final shipments before sunset. Fishermen repaired torn nets while gulls circled overhead crying sharply against the golden sky. Along dusty roads outside the city, farmers guided tired animals back toward barns and fields glowing softly beneath evening light. And throughout Rome itself, cooking fires slowly came alive again. Smoke curled upward from thousands of homes. The smell of supper drifted into the streets. Bread warming near flames. Garlic and onions sizzling in oil. Lentils cooking slowly in clay pots. Children returning home dusty and tired. The city exhaled. After another long day beneath the Roman sun, families gathered once more inside lamplit rooms where ordinary life continued quietly into the night. Evening settled gently over Rome like a slow-moving curtain of shadow and cooling air. The fierce brightness of the afternoon softened into gold, then amber, then deep blue spreading gradually above rooftops and temple columns. Across the city, tired workers made their way home. Sandals scraped along dusty streets. Wooden cartwheels rolled heavily over uneven stone roads worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. Merchants lowered shutters over market stalls while counting the day's remaining coins beneath fading sunlight. The smell of supper drifted everywhere now. Warm bread. Boiled lentils. Garlic crushed into oil. Smoke rising from cooking fires. In the narrow streets of crowded neighborhoods, these smells mixed together into the familiar scent of evening itself. Inside one small apartment near the public baths, a mother stirred a pot slowly while her children waited nearby with growing hunger. The room remained warm from the day's heat, though a slight breeze now entered through the open window carrying distant sounds from the street below. The youngest child sat cross-legged on the floor tracing shapes through dust with one finger. His older brother leaned against the wall fighting sleep after spending the afternoon helping unload baskets at the market. Their father had not returned yet. The mother listened carefully each time footsteps sounded on the staircase outside. At last, after the sky darkened further, the familiar creak of the wooden stairs reached the doorway. The father entered slowly. Dust covered his legs nearly to the knees. Sweat darkened the collar of his tunic. One shoulder sagged lower than the other from carrying heavy stone all day at a construction site beyond the forum. For a moment he simply stood inside the doorway breathing quietly. Then the children rushed toward him. Even exhausted fathers often softened immediately when children greeted them this way. The long weight of labor eased for a few moments beneath familiar voices and small arms wrapping around tired legs. He smiled faintly and rested one rough hand against his son's hair. The room glowed softly in lamplight. Outside, twilight deepened over Rome. Family meals remained one of the few times many Roman households truly gathered together. During daylight hours, work often separated everyone. Fathers labored across the city. Mothers managed endless household responsibilities. Children ran errands, apprenticed, studied, or worked beside relatives. But evening brought people back beneath the same roof again. In poorer homes, meals stayed simple because food was expensive and difficult to store safely in the heat. Bread remained central to nearly every supper. Lentils, beans, onions, cabbage, olives, and bits of cheese filled clay bowls arranged carefully across worn tables. Meat appeared rarely for many ordinary families. Still, even modest meals carried comfort after long days of labor. The father sat slowly onto a stool while stretching sore fingers near the cooking fire. His wife handed him a small cup of watered wine. The children watched eagerly as bread was divided into careful portions. Nothing could be wasted. Roman families understood the value of food deeply because hunger was never far away for many people. Poor harvests, rising grain prices, illness, or lost work could quickly create hardship. Parents often ate less so children could eat enough. Mothers quietly stretched ingredients farther than seemed possible. A single loaf might feed an entire household. Outside their apartment building, voices drifted upward from the street. Neighbors speaking beside doorways. Vendors selling late goods before darkness fully arrived. A mule snorting impatiently while pulling a cart uphill. The sounds blended together into the steady rhythm of Roman evening life. In wealthier districts, dinners unfolded differently but still centered around gathering together. Lamps illuminated painted dining rooms where guests reclined on cushioned couches while servants carried trays of food across mosaic floors. Bowls of fruit, roasted meats, fish, herbs, sauces, and sweet pastries covered long tables. Music played softly in the background while conversation moved through politics, trade, poetry, and family matters. Yet even here, quieter moments existed beneath the display of wealth. A child falling asleep beside her mother during a long meal. An aging grandfather rubbing aching wrists while listening more than speaking. A servant pausing briefly near an open courtyard to feel the cool evening breeze before returning to work. Human life remained shaped by the same needs regardless of status. Food. Rest. Family. Relief from heat. Comfort at the end of exhausting days. As darkness settled fully across Rome, lamps became the city's scattered stars. Tiny flames flickered behind shutters, across balconies, beside courtyards, and inside workshops still finishing the day's final tasks. Night transformed the city. The harsh brightness and movement of afternoon disappeared. Shadows softened corners of buildings and blurred the crowded streets into quieter shapes. Marble temples glowed pale beneath moonlight while fountains reflected silver ripples into the darkness. The air cooled little by little. Families climbed onto rooftops seeking relief from trapped heat inside apartment rooms. These rooftop evenings became important during the warmest months. Neighbors gathered quietly beneath the stars. Some shared bread or fruit while speaking softly about work, weather, or relatives in distant towns. Others simply rested in silence after difficult days. Children often fell asleep quickly beneath the open sky. A grandmother sitting on one rooftop pointed toward constellations while telling stories softly to her grandchildren. Her voice moved slowly through the warm night air while the children leaned sleepily against folded blankets. Below them, Rome stretched endlessly into darkness. The city seemed softer from above. Less crowded. Less harsh. Only scattered lamps and drifting sounds beneath the stars. Far beyond the city center, the countryside also settled into night. Fields cooled beneath moonlight. Olive groves stood silent except for insects humming among dry grass. Farmhouses glowed dimly beside dirt roads winding through the hills. Rural families often slept earlier than city families because their days began before sunrise. Farmers depended entirely on daylight and weather. Their routines followed the rhythm of seasons more closely than anything else. Inside one small farmhouse, a young mother washed wooden bowls after supper while her husband checked the animals outside before bed. Their children already slept together beneath wool blankets near the hearth. The room smelled of ash, bread, earth, and olive oil. Outside, crickets sang steadily beneath the dark sky. The farmer returned indoors and sat heavily beside the doorway, removing worn sandals stiff with dust. His wife handed him water while they spoke quietly about tomorrow's work. There would always be more work. Fences needing repair. Fields needing clearing. Animals needing care. Grain needing storage before damp weather arrived. Roman family life rarely paused completely. Even rest carried thoughts of tomorrow's labor. Back in Rome, bathhouses remained busy well into the evening. For many ordinary Romans, public baths offered not only cleanliness but temporary escape from crowded homes and exhausting work. Warm water soothed aching muscles. Steam opened lungs clogged by dust and smoke. Inside the baths, conversations echoed gently against stone walls. Men discussed grain shipments, politics, weather, wages, and family concerns while sitting beside pools glowing softly in lamplight. Some simply closed their eyes and rested quietly. An older laborer lowered himself slowly into warm water while sighing deeply from relief. His back had carried stone for nearly 30 years. The heat of the bath loosened pain that never fully disappeared anymore. Nearby, younger workers laughed softly while splashing water over tired shoulders. The bathhouse smelled of steam, oil, damp stone, and smoke from the furnaces heating water beneath the floors. Outside, night deepened further. Street traffic slowed. Shop doors closed one by one. The city's energy gradually folded inward toward homes, rooftops, taverns, and sleeping rooms. In poorer neighborhoods, nighttime sometimes revealed how fragile daily life truly was. A leaking roof. A sick child coughing through the darkness. An empty grain jar near the cooking fire. A father unable to find enough work that week. These quiet struggles remained hidden behind ordinary routines. One woman sat awake beside her sleeping children while mending torn clothing under weak lamplight. Her husband had injured his hand days earlier and could not work properly at the docks. Money was becoming scarce. Still, she stitched carefully. Patch after patch. The steady movement calmed her thoughts. Outside the window, someone played a pipe softly in the street below. The melody drifted upward through warm night air. Roman cities could feel lonely at night despite the crowds. So many people lived pressed closely together, yet private worries remained mostly unseen by others. An elderly widower eating supper alone beside a fading lamp. A servant sleeping on a kitchen floor far from the homeland she barely remembered. A young mother whispering prayers over a feverish child. These quiet human moments existed everywhere beneath the larger life of the empire. Yet there was comfort too. Comfort in familiar routines repeated daily. Comfort in hearing loved ones breathing nearby during the night. Comfort in bread shared around small tables. Comfort in cool evening air after brutal heat. Comfort in knowing tomorrow would likely unfold much like today. For many Romans, stability itself became a kind of peace. As midnight slowly approached, silence deepened across more of the city. The taverns quieted. Footsteps became less frequent. Most lamps burned low or disappeared entirely behind shuttered windows. Moonlight rested across empty marketplaces where crowds had stood only hours earlier. Cats moved silently through alleyways searching for scraps among abandoned baskets and broken pottery. A night watchman paused beside a public fountain and listened carefully. Water splashed softly into the basin. Somewhere far away, a baby cried briefly before becoming quiet again. The watchman adjusted his cloak against the cooler air and continued walking through the sleeping streets. Above him, Rome rested beneath countless stars. Inside homes throughout the city, families slept close together. Children curled beside parents. Grandparents breathing softly beneath folded blankets. Workers resting sore muscles before another demanding dawn. And slowly, through the peaceful darkness, ancient Rome drifted deeper into silence while oil lamps faded one by one into the night. Long before sunrise returned to the rooftops of Rome, the city remained wrapped in deep blue darkness. The night air felt softer now, cooler against stone walls that had released the heat of yesterday little by little into the sky. Most families still slept. Inside crowded apartment buildings, breathing rose and fell quietly through narrow rooms where entire households rested together beneath rough wool blankets. Oil lamps had long since burned out, leaving only moonlight slipping through shutters and cracks in old wooden doors. In one small room near the edge of the city, a young mother woke suddenly to the sound of coughing. She lifted her head slowly from the mattress. Beside her, her youngest daughter shifted restlessly beneath the blanket, coughing again into the darkness. The child's forehead felt warm when the mother placed her hand gently against it. The mother sighed quietly. Illness moved easily through Roman homes. Crowded rooms, smoky air, poor drainage, spoiled food, and difficult working conditions left many families vulnerable to fever and sickness throughout the year. Some illnesses passed quickly. Others lingered for weeks. Many mothers spent long nights awake beside sick children. The woman rose carefully so she would not wake the rest of the family. She poured a little water into a small clay cup and held it gently to the child's lips. Outside, Rome remained nearly silent. Only faint sounds drifted through the darkness now. The distant barking of dogs. A cart far away on stone streets. The endless quiet flow of water from public fountains. The mother sat beside her daughter for a long while listening to the sleeping city around her. Eventually the coughing eased. The child drifted back into restless sleep. The mother remained awake, staring toward the faint outline of the window while waiting for dawn. Across Rome, others were already beginning their work. Night bakers moved heavily through hot rooms lit by firelight. Their faces glowed orange beside roaring ovens while fresh loaves slowly baked for the morning crowds. Flour dust floated thickly through the warm air. One baker wiped sweat from his forehead with tired hands and stretched his aching back. The work never truly stopped. Each day blended into the next beneath heat, smoke, and exhaustion. Yet there was comfort in routine too. He knew exactly how the dough should feel beneath his hands. Exactly how the oven sounded when the fire burned correctly. Exactly how the first morning customers would smell the bread before even reaching the doorway. Outside the bakery, darkness slowly softened toward gray. Dawn approached quietly. In the countryside beyond Rome, farm families stirred even earlier than city workers. Roosters cried into the fading night while distant fields remained hidden beneath mist and shadow. A farmer opened the wooden door of his small home and stepped outside barefoot into cool earth. The sky above the hills had begun changing color, though stars still lingered faintly overhead. He inhaled deeply. The countryside smelled different at dawn than at any other time. Damp soil. Olive trees. Wood smoke from nearby homes. Morning dew resting on dry grass. The farmer listened to insects fading slowly as birds began greeting the morning from distant trees. Soon the fields would become hot again. Soon sweat would darken every worker's tunic beneath the rising sun. But for these brief moments before sunrise, the land felt calm and gentle. Behind him, inside the farmhouse, his wife prepared bread beside a small fire while their children still slept together near the hearth. Farm life demanded constant movement from every family member. Even young children learned responsibilities early. Feeding animals. Carrying water. Gathering olives. Pulling weeds. Sweeping floors. Helping prepare food. There was always another task waiting. Still, these morning moments carried a peaceful rhythm many Romans understood deeply. The gradual waking of the world. The slow return of sound. The first light touching rooftops and trees. Back inside Rome, the city awakened street by street. At the public fountains, early risers already gathered with clay jars balanced against hips and shoulders. Water splashed steadily into worn stone basins while neighbors exchanged quiet greetings beneath the pale morning sky. A little girl rubbed sleep from her eyes while standing beside her grandmother in line for water. She leaned heavily against the older woman's side, still wrapped partly in yesterday's blanket. The grandmother smiled faintly and adjusted the child's hair. Morning routines often passed from one generation to another without words. Children learned simply by standing nearby. Watching. Listening. Helping little by little until the work became their own. As sunlight slowly reached the tops of buildings, market streets began filling once more. Shopkeepers lifted shutters. Sweepers pushed dust and refuse from doorways into the roads. Donkeys pulled wagons loaded with vegetables, wine jars, fish, and grain toward the crowded marketplaces. The smell of bread spread quickly through the waking city. Warm loaves rested in bakery windows while customers gathered outside carrying small baskets or cloth sacks. Some families could afford fresh bread daily. Others bought only enough to stretch carefully across several meals. A father standing outside a bakery counted coins twice before purchasing a single loaf. Beside him, his son stared sleepily at rows of warm bread cooling in the morning air. The father broke off a small piece and handed it to the boy immediately. The child smiled quietly while chewing. Tiny moments like this filled ordinary Roman family life. Simple acts of care repeated through difficult days. Food shared carefully. Blankets adjusted at night. Children carried when tired feet could walk no farther. Small kindnesses hidden inside exhausting routines. As morning grew brighter, Rome expanded into full motion again. The forum filled with voices echoing between marble buildings. Officials crossed busy streets followed by servants and assistants. Merchants argued over prices while laborers searched for work near construction sites and warehouses. Dust rose beneath countless sandals. The city felt alive in every direction. Yet beneath this constant movement, countless private family lives continued quietly. A mother teaching her daughter how to knead dough inside a dim kitchen. A father guiding his son through simple writing exercises on a wax tablet. An elderly woman brushing dust from blankets hung outside an apartment window. These quieter moments rarely appeared in Roman histories, yet they shaped daily existence far more deeply than public speeches or military victories. In one modest home near the river district, a boy practiced reading aloud while his older sister repaired torn clothing beside him. Their mother moved between them preparing beans for the evening meal. The room was small but filled with familiar sounds. The scratching of stylus against wax. The soft pull of thread through fabric. Water simmering gently over flame. Outside, footsteps echoed endlessly through the crowded street. The family worked together in silence for long stretches, interrupted only by small conversations drifting naturally through the room. Roman homes often felt busy from morning until night. Very little privacy existed, especially for poor families living in cramped spaces. Children, parents, grandparents, and sometimes extended relatives shared nearly every moment together. People learned to exist within constant closeness. To sleep through noise. To work beside conversation. To find tiny moments of solitude even inside crowded rooms. At midday, the heat returned once more. Sunlight reflected harshly from white stone buildings and dusty roads. Workers wrapped cloth around their heads while carrying supplies across the city. Animals slowed beneath the weight of carts and heavy air. Inside workshops, craftsmen continued labor despite the heat. A potter shaped wet clay beside an open doorway while sweat rolled slowly down his arms. Shelves filled with drying bowls and jars lined the walls around him. Nearby, his daughter painted simple designs onto finished pottery with careful concentration. Her fingers moved slowly and steadily. The potter watched her work for a moment and nodded quietly. Skills passed through families this way every day across Rome. A fisherman teaching his son how to repair nets. A laundress showing her daughter how to scrub cloth properly. A carpenter guiding young hands across rough wood. Most children inherited not only family names but family labor as well. And through this labor, families remained connected generation after generation. Outside the city, the afternoon heat settled heavily over farms and vineyards. Workers bent low beneath the sun harvesting grapes or cutting grain while insects hummed through dry fields. The smell of crushed plants and warm earth rose into the still air. A young farm boy carried water to his father and older brothers working among olive trees. The clay jug felt heavy against his chest. His father smiled gratefully while drinking. Then the work continued. Roman life often allowed little time for rest, especially during harvest seasons when entire families worked from dawn until darkness. Yet even difficult labor carried moments of quiet beauty. Wind moving softly through wheat fields. Birds circling high above distant hills. The golden light of evening spreading slowly across vineyards after the heat began fading. As afternoon softened once more toward sunset, families throughout Rome prepared for another evening together. Smoke rose from rooftops. Cooking fires crackled. The city slowly exhaled after another long day. Children returned home dusty and tired from errands or apprenticeships. Fathers washed hands and faces at public fountains before climbing narrow staircases toward waiting suppers. Mothers arranged simple meals beneath the growing glow of oil lamps. One family gathered beside an open window where cooler evening air drifted gently through the room. The father spoke quietly about work at the docks. The mother folded clothing while listening. Their youngest child had already fallen asleep with bread still resting loosely in one hand. Outside, the first stars appeared above Rome. Temple columns faded into shadow. Voices softened across the streets. And as night slowly returned to the ancient city once more, ordinary families settled again into the familiar rhythms of home, rest, and quiet companionship beneath the endless Roman sky. Night deepened slowly across the Roman world, spreading over rooftops, farms, roads, and distant hills beneath a sky crowded with quiet stars. The heat of the day lingered softly in the stones, though cooler air now moved gently through alleyways and open courtyards. Across Rome, lamps flickered behind windows like tiny islands of gold floating in darkness. Inside homes, families settled into the final hours of the day. In a modest apartment near the leatherworkers' district, a father sat beside the doorway carefully rubbing oil into a worn pair of sandals while his wife prepared sleeping blankets nearby. Their children lay stretched across the floor already drifting toward sleep after long hours spent helping at the market. The room smelled of leather, smoke, olive oil, and dust. Outside, faint laughter drifted upward from a tavern farther down the street. The father worked slowly. His fingers were cracked from years of labor. Small scars crossed his knuckles and wrists from tools, rope, and rough stone walls. Even simple tasks now required patience because tiredness settled deeply into his body each evening. Still, he continued repairing the sandals carefully. New ones would cost too much. Roman families repaired nearly everything they owned. A cracked bowl might survive years after careful mending. Tunics were patched over and over again until the original fabric almost disappeared beneath repairs. Blankets became thinner each winter from constant use. Nothing was easily replaced. The mother folded clothing beside the lamp while listening to the breathing of her sleeping children. The youngest boy twitched softly in dreams, one small hand curled beneath his cheek. The room had finally begun cooling after sunset. For a little while, the family could rest. Elsewhere in the city, many people still remained awake. Near the river, dock workers gathered outside small taverns after unloading cargo all day beneath the sun. Their shoulders ached from lifting grain sacks and heavy jars from merchant ships arriving from distant provinces. The smell near the docks remained strong even at night. River mud, fish scales, wet rope, smoke drifting from nearby kitchens. One tired worker leaned back against a wall with a cup of watered wine resting loosely between rough hands. Beside him, another man spoke quietly about his children sleeping at home above a crowded bakery. The conversation moved slowly. No one had much energy left for excitement after such long labor. Nearby, a musician played soft notes on a pipe while night insects hummed beyond the torchlight. Rome could feel strangely peaceful during these late hours. The daytime noise faded enough that smaller sounds became noticeable again. Sandals brushing stone. A distant door closing. Water dripping into fountains. Wind touching hanging cloth between buildings. The city breathed differently at night. In wealthier neighborhoods, large villas rested quietly behind high walls and shaded courtyards. Servants extinguished lamps one by one along polished hallways while families prepared for sleep. A Roman mother entered her daughter's room carrying a small oil lamp. The child already slept beneath linen blankets, one arm wrapped around a cloth doll stitched by a servant years earlier. Moonlight touched the painted walls softly while the tiny flame flickered beside the doorway. The mother paused for a moment, simply watching her daughter breathe. Even wealthy Roman parents understood how uncertain childhood could be. Illness, fever, accidents, and poor medicine touched every level of society. Many families lost children despite all efforts to protect them. Because of this, ordinary quiet moments often carried deep meaning. A sleeping child. A healthy morning. A peaceful family meal. Simple things became precious. The mother lowered the lamp flame and stepped quietly from the room. Far beyond the city center, night spread gently over the countryside as well. Farmhouses stood scattered among fields silvered by moonlight. Olive trees cast long shadows across dry earth while crickets sang steadily through the warm darkness. Inside one farmhouse near the edge of a vineyard, 3 generations of a family rested together beneath the same roof. The grandparents slept near the hearth where faint warmth still remained from the evening fire. Their son and his wife rested beside the opposite wall while 2 children slept between folded blankets nearby. The room smelled faintly of ash, wool, grapes, and old wood. Outside, a donkey shifted softly inside its shelter. Then stillness returned again. Rural nights often felt quieter than the city in a way difficult to describe. Without the endless movement of crowds and wagons, even tiny sounds seemed larger. Wind brushing dry grass. Owls calling from distant trees. Footsteps approaching along empty roads. Families living far from towns learned to notice every sound carefully. A farmer lying awake at night might listen for storms, animals disturbing fences, or strangers traveling after dark. But tonight remained calm. The fields rested peacefully beneath the stars. Back inside Rome, many apartment rooftops still held families escaping the trapped heat below. Some people slept outside during the hottest months because upper rooms became difficult to breathe in after long summer days. Rooftops offered cooler air and a little more space beneath the open sky. An elderly grandmother sat wrapped in a thin shawl while two grandchildren slept beside her on folded blankets. She watched the stars quietly while distant sounds drifted upward from the city below. She remembered sleeping the same way when she herself had been a child. Rome had changed greatly since then. New buildings had risen. Old neighborhoods had disappeared. Emperors had come and gone. But family routines remained familiar. The carrying of water. The baking of bread. The mending of clothing beside evening lamps. The comforting of children during fevered nights. These rhythms continued generation after generation beneath the same stars. The grandmother closed her eyes briefly as warm night air touched her face. Far below, somewhere in the darkness, a baby began crying. A mother's soft voice answered almost immediately. Then silence again. Roman nights belonged partly to women. During daylight hours, much work happened publicly in markets, workshops, docks, and streets. But night revealed quieter labor hidden inside homes. Washing bowls after supper. Preparing grain for morning bread. Rocking restless infants. Repairing torn tunics. Checking fevers. Folding blankets. Cleaning lamps. Many mothers and grandmothers slept only lightly because someone in the household always seemed to need care. A woman living near the city bath sat beside a sleeping child with a damp cloth resting across the boy's forehead. The fever had lasted 2 days now. The small room felt close and heavy despite the open window. Outside, moonlight reflected faintly from the public fountain below. The woman dipped the cloth into cool water again and pressed it gently against the child's skin. There was little else she could do. Roman medicine often relied on herbs, rest, oils, prayers, and hope more than effective treatment. Families cared for one another the best they could using knowledge passed down through generations. Sometimes it was enough. Sometimes it was not. Tonight, the mother simply stayed awake beside her son while the city slept around them. Elsewhere, a young servant girl crossed a dark courtyard carrying folded blankets through a wealthy villa. Her feet moved silently across cool stone while fountain water echoed gently nearby. She had worked since before sunrise. Now her body felt heavy with exhaustion. Still, a few tasks remained before sleep. The household depended on endless invisible labor from servants and enslaved workers. Floors cleaned. Lamps filled. Clothing washed. Food prepared. Water carried. Most of this work passed unnoticed by those who benefited from it. Yet it formed the quiet structure beneath Roman daily life. The servant paused briefly beneath the open sky of the courtyard. Moonlight reflected softly in the fountain basin. For a moment, the house felt perfectly still. Then she continued walking. Late into the night, only a few parts of Rome remained truly active. Night watchmen carried lamps through dark streets while listening for signs of trouble. Bakers prepared fresh dough for morning ovens. Tavern keepers cleaned cups and tables beneath fading torchlight. Most families, however, had already surrendered to sleep. Inside crowded rooms throughout the city, bodies rested closely together. Parents beside children. Brothers beside sisters. Grandparents near the warmth of dying fires. Breathing filled the darkness softly. Some dreamed peacefully. Others shifted through restless sleep beneath lingering heat and aching muscles. A construction worker sleeping near the forum twitched occasionally from pain in his shoulders even while unconscious. His body carried years of labor inside every joint and scar. Tomorrow he would wake before sunrise and return to work again. Like countless others. The repetition of Roman life could feel endless. Yet within that repetition existed familiarity and quiet belonging. The same streets walked daily. The same voices heard at the fountain. The same evening meals shared beside lamplight. Families built their lives from these repeated moments. Not from great historical events, but from ordinary mornings and tired evenings. From worn sandals by the doorway. From bread divided carefully among children. From soft voices speaking in the dark before sleep arrived. As midnight slowly passed over Rome, clouds drifted across part of the moon, dimming the rooftops and temples beneath gentle shadow. The city grew quieter still. Even the taverns began settling into silence. Only fountains continued speaking steadily into the night. Water flowing endlessly through ancient stone. And beneath that quiet music, Rome slept on beside the river, wrapped in darkness, memory, and the peaceful rhythm of countless ordinary families resting together beneath the ancient sky. The final hours before dawn often felt suspended between worlds. Rome rested beneath fading moonlight while the first signs of morning waited quietly beyond the eastern hills. Darkness still covered the narrow streets and crowded rooftops, yet the night no longer felt deep. The air carried a soft expectation, as though the city itself knew another day was slowly approaching. Inside a small apartment near the cloth market, an old man woke before everyone else. For a long moment he remained still beneath his blanket listening to familiar sounds around him. His daughter and her children slept nearby, their breathing soft and uneven in the warm room. Somewhere outside, water dripped steadily into a public fountain. The old man sat up slowly. Age had made every movement careful. His knees ached in the mornings now. His back stiffened during the night. His hands no longer closed tightly around tools the way they once had during his years as a carpenter. Still, he preferred these quiet hours before sunrise. The city felt gentler then. He crossed the room carefully without waking the children and opened the wooden shutters beside the window. Cool air drifted inside carrying the faint smell of dust, smoke, and damp stone. Above the rooftops, stars still shimmered faintly. The old man rested his arms against the windowsill and watched the sleeping city. He had spent his entire life in Rome. As a child, he had run through these same streets carrying wood shavings home for his father's workshop. As a young man, he had built doors, furniture, and roof beams for homes across the city. Later came marriage, children, long years of labor, illness, funerals, grandchildren. Now most days passed quietly. Yet the rhythms of Roman life remained unchanged around him. Morning bread. Busy markets. The smell of olive oil and smoke. Evening lamps glowing behind shutters. The old man closed his eyes briefly while listening to the distant city breathing in darkness. Soon the bakers would light their ovens. Soon footsteps would fill the streets again. But not yet. Across Rome, countless other people rested through these final peaceful moments before dawn. Children sprawled across mattresses stuffed with straw. Mothers sleeping lightly beside infants. Workers exhausted after long days beneath the heat. Servants curled beneath blankets near kitchens and courtyards. Night covered everyone equally. In a wealthy villa overlooking one of the quieter districts, a servant moved silently through the dark kitchen preparing the morning fire. She crouched beside the hearth arranging dry wood carefully while embers from the previous evening glowed faintly beneath gray ash. The villa remained silent behind her. Marble floors still cool from the night. Fountain water echoing softly through open courtyards. Curtains moving gently in the early breeze. The servant rubbed tired eyes before striking flint against steel. Soon the household would wake. Children would call for breakfast. Servants would hurry through hallways carrying water and trays. The master of the house would prepare for meetings at the forum. But for these few quiet moments, the entire villa belonged only to silence, darkness, and the tiny growing flame inside the hearth. Outside the city walls, dawn approached more clearly across the countryside. The eastern horizon slowly turned pale behind distant olive groves and vineyards. Morning mist drifted low over fields still cool from the night. Birds stirred among cypress trees lining dusty roads. Farmers often rose before first light because the cooler hours mattered deeply during warmer seasons. A woman stepped outside her farmhouse carrying an empty basket toward the chicken enclosure. The ground felt damp beneath her sandals. She paused briefly beside the doorway. The countryside smelled fresh before sunrise. Earth, grass, wood smoke beginning in nearby homes. Far away, she could hear another farmer already guiding animals toward the fields. Soon the heat would return again, pressing heavily over roads and vineyards until evening. But dawn remained peaceful. The woman collected eggs slowly while the sky brightened little by little above the hills. Behind her, inside the farmhouse, her husband ground grain into flour using a heavy stone mill while their oldest son prepared tools for the day's work. Their younger children still slept near the hearth wrapped together beneath blankets. Roman family life in the countryside depended entirely on shared labor. Every person contributed according to strength and age. Even the youngest children learned responsibilities early because farm survival demanded constant work. Yet rural mornings often carried a calm rhythm difficult to find inside crowded Rome. The slow appearance of sunlight across fields. The sound of birds replacing insects from the night before. The smell of bread beginning near cooking fires. These simple moments marked the beginning of another ordinary day beneath the Roman sky. Back in the city, the first real sounds of morning finally emerged. A bakery door creaked open. A donkey snorted impatiently beside a loaded cart. Footsteps echoed faintly along a nearby alleyway. Rome was waking again. At the public fountains, early lines began forming beneath pale dawn light. Women carrying clay jars waited quietly while water poured endlessly into worn stone basins. Some yawned heavily. Others spoke in hushed voices while children leaned sleepily against their sides. A young boy struggled to hold a water jar steady while his mother adjusted the cloth beneath it to protect his shoulder from the weight. Water remained one of the constant labors shaping Roman daily life. Carrying it, pouring it, heating it, washing with it carefully because every drop required effort. The fountain splashed steadily while sunlight slowly reached the upper walls of nearby buildings. In another neighborhood, a fish seller prepared his stall before sunrise fully arrived. He arranged fresh catches across wet wooden tables while gulls circled overhead crying sharply through the cool morning air. The smell near the market already grew strong. Salt, fish scales, river mud. Nearby, another merchant unloaded baskets of figs from a wagon while muttering softly to himself about prices and spoiled fruit. Morning markets always carried a feeling of possibility. Fresh food arriving. Coins changing hands. Neighbors gathering. News spreading from district to district. For many Roman families, the market shaped the entire rhythm of the day. Mothers planned meals based on what could be afforded. Children ran errands carrying small baskets through crowded streets. Fathers stopped briefly before work to purchase bread or olives for supper later that evening. The market connected every household to the larger life of the city. As sunlight strengthened across Rome, shadows withdrew gradually from the narrow roads. Dust rose beneath growing crowds. Voices multiplied until the city once again became a living wall of sound and movement. Yet hidden inside this great noise remained countless small family routines. An older sister braiding her younger brother's hair before school. A father tying leather straps around worn sandals beside the doorway. A grandmother sweeping yesterday's dust from the floor while muttering softly about careless children. These ordinary actions repeated endlessly across the city. Inside one apartment above a busy workshop, a mother taught her daughter how to fold and store wool cloth properly inside a wooden chest. "Keep it dry," she whispered gently. "And away from smoke when you can." The daughter nodded carefully. Knowledge moved quietly between generations this way. Not through grand speeches, but through simple instructions repeated during daily life. How to bake bread without burning it. How to patch torn tunics. How to recognize spoiled grain. How to soothe a fevered child during the night. Roman families survived through shared memory and habit. The city itself could be harsh and exhausting. Streets crowded with strangers. Summer heat trapped between stone walls. Illness spreading quickly through packed neighborhoods. But home, however small, offered a center point against the chaos. A familiar table. A familiar lamp. Voices known since childhood. By midday, the warmth returned fully to Rome. The cool softness of dawn disappeared beneath bright sunlight reflecting off marble buildings and dusty roads. Workers shaded their eyes while carrying materials through crowded streets. At a construction site near a public bathhouse, laborers hauled stone blocks into position while foremen shouted instructions above the noise. One worker paused briefly beside a pile of tools and stretched aching shoulders. His son worked nearby carrying smaller loads. The boy tried hard not to show tiredness. His father noticed anyway. Without speaking, the older man handed him a piece of bread saved from breakfast. The boy accepted it silently. Small gestures mattered greatly in Roman families because daily life demanded so much endurance from everyone. Parents rarely had leisure or luxury to offer. What they gave instead was effort. Protection. Food divided carefully. Skills passed patiently from one generation to the next. As afternoon slowly approached once more, the city settled into its familiar rhythm of heat, labor, and exhaustion beneath the endless Roman sun. And throughout it all, ordinary families continued living quietly inside history, their days flowing one into another like the steady water moving endlessly through Rome's ancient fountains. By the middle of the afternoon, the warmth over Rome had grown heavy once again. Sunlight poured across rooftops and temple stones until the entire city seemed to shimmer beneath the pale sky. Dust floated through the streets in soft golden clouds stirred by sandals, carts, and restless animals moving slowly through the heat. For many Romans, this was the most difficult part of the day. Bodies grew tired. Tempers shortened. The air inside crowded buildings became still and close. In a narrow apartment above a noisy alleyway, a young mother sat beside an open window trying to catch even the smallest breeze. Her infant daughter slept in her lap while sweat gathered along the woman's neck and temples. The room smelled faintly of warm wool, bread crumbs, smoke, and olive oil. From below came the sounds of the street. A merchant calling prices. Children arguing briefly before laughter replaced the quarrel. The distant clatter of metal tools striking stone. The woman rocked the infant slowly while staring out at sunlight resting across the opposite wall. Afternoons often felt endless during the warmer months. Many people slowed their work if they could. Shopkeepers sat in shaded doorways waiting for customers. Laborers searched for patches of shadow beside unfinished buildings. Dogs rested beneath carts with tongues hanging heavily in the heat. Even Rome itself seemed to breathe more slowly. Inside workshops throughout the city, craftsmen continued their work despite exhaustion. A bronze worker hammered carefully at a dented bowl while sweat dripped from his chin onto the floor below. Nearby, his teenage son polished finished pieces using rough cloth darkened by years of use. The room glowed softly from reflected metal and drifting sunlight. The father paused for a moment and flexed sore fingers. Years of repetitive labor shaped Roman bodies in quiet ways. Knees stiffened from climbing endless stairs. Shoulders bent from carrying heavy loads. Hands thickened and scarred from tools and rope. Most ordinary Romans carried signs of labor long before old age arrived. Yet work continued day after day because families depended upon it. The bronze worker glanced toward his son. The boy's movements still looked uncertain sometimes. Too quick. Too rough around the edges. But slowly, year after year, the work was becoming part of him. This was how many Roman trades survived. Through fathers teaching sons. Through mothers teaching daughters. Through apprentices watching older hands repeat familiar movements thousands of times. Knowledge passed quietly between generations like water flowing through narrow channels. Outside, the streets near the Forum remained crowded despite the heat. Officials crossed open squares beneath bright sunlight while scribes carried bundles of documents through busy passageways. Merchants shaded themselves beneath hanging cloth awnings while arguing over prices with customers. A young boy hurried through the crowd balancing a basket of figs against his hip. His sandals slapped quickly against warm stone as he moved carefully between strangers. He knew these streets well. Which roads stayed shaded longer? Which vendors became angry if children lingered nearby? Which fountains offered the coolest water during hot afternoons? Rome taught children to observe everything. To move carefully. To adapt quickly. Many children spent more time outdoors than inside crowded homes. Streets became places of work, errands, learning, and sometimes play. Near a public fountain, two girls used broken pieces of pottery to draw shapes in dust while their mothers filled water jars nearby. Their laughter drifted softly through the warm air before disappearing again beneath the larger sounds of the city. Childhood existed in small moments between responsibility. As the afternoon continued, the smell of the city changed again beneath the heat. Fish markets grew sharper. Animal waste baked beneath sunlight. Smoke from cooking fires drifted lazily through the still air. Near the river, damp mud released heavy earthy smells into the streets surrounding the docks. A dock worker sat beside a warehouse wall eating bread slowly while watching boats move along the Tiber River. His tunic clung damply to his back from unloading cargo since sunrise. The river moved steadily beneath bright reflections of sunlight. Boatmen called softly to one another while guiding shipments toward crowded piers. Grain from Egypt. Olive oil from Hispania. Wine from distant vineyards. Rome depended on endless movement to feed itself. And hidden inside that movement were countless ordinary families. Sailors missing children sleeping far away. Merchants counting coins while worrying about aging parents at home. Workers saving tiny amounts of money for future marriages or funerals. The great city was built from private hopes and worries rarely spoken aloud. In wealthier homes, afternoons unfolded more quietly. Thick stone walls helped keep interiors cooler while shaded courtyards offered relief from the sun. Servants moved carefully through silent hallways carrying water, fruit, folded clothing, and messages. A Roman woman reclined beside a courtyard fountain while supervising household accounts written onto wax tablets by a family scribe. Nearby, her young son practiced reading aloud beneath the watchful eye of a tutor. The sound of splashing water softened the silence around them. Even wealthy families lived according to routines centered on household management and family duty. Marriages connected families politically and financially. Children represented future stability. Servants and enslaved workers maintained the household through endless unseen labor. Everything depended on careful organization. The woman looked briefly toward her son struggling over difficult lines of poetry. His voice stumbled. The tutor corrected him gently. The woman smiled faintly before returning to her work. Across the countryside outside Rome, the afternoon sun hung heavily above dry fields and vineyards. Farm workers continued harvesting beneath wide open skies while insects hummed through tall grass. Dust coated sandals and lower legs. Sweat darkened clothing until fabric clung tightly against skin. A farmer's wife carried water to workers resting briefly beneath an olive tree. Clay cups passed from hand to hand while tired bodies leaned gratefully against the rough trunk. No one spoke very much. The heat drained conversation away. Beyond the fields, distant hills appeared pale and hazy beneath the sunlight. Life in the countryside could feel quieter than the city, but it was no less demanding. Crops depended entirely on weather and timing. A poor harvest threatened entire families. Storms, drought, insects, or sickness among animals could ruin months of labor. Because of this uncertainty, Roman farm families often lived carefully and modestly even during good seasons. Nothing could be taken for granted. Yet there were moments of beauty too. The sound of wind moving through grain. The smell of crushed grapes during harvest season. Evening light spreading softly across vineyards after the heat began to fade. As the afternoon slowly moved toward evening, shadows lengthened once more across Rome. The harsh brightness softened little by little. Workers lifted tired heads toward the changing sky. Soon the day's labor would end. At laundries across the city, women wrung water from heavy cloth while steam drifted upward around them. Their arms ached from hours spent scrubbing garments stained by sweat, dust, smoke, and labor. Nearby, children folded dry tunics into neat stacks while trying not to yawn. Laundry work never truly ended. Neither did cooking. Nor carrying water. Nor cleaning. Roman homes demanded constant attention simply to remain functional. A grandmother living with her daughter's family swept dust from the floor for the third time that day while muttering softly about sandals dragging dirt inside from the street. Her granddaughter followed behind carrying folded blankets nearly as large as herself. The older woman paused and adjusted the child's grip more carefully. "Not too close to the floor," she whispered. The little girl nodded seriously. These quiet lessons filled ordinary days. How to store grain safely. How to fold blankets against dampness. How to keep oil lamps from smoking too heavily. Tiny practical knowledge passed between generations without ceremony. As sunset approached, Rome gradually softened again into evening rhythm. The sounds of hammers slowed. Market stalls began closing. Workers returned through dusty streets toward homes waiting above shops and alleyways. The city smelled of cooking fires once more. Bread warming beside flames. Onions sizzling in oil. Herbs crushed into soups and stews. Children leaned sleepily against parents while waiting for supper. A father climbed the narrow staircase toward his apartment carrying a small bundle of leftover vegetables from the market where he worked all day. His youngest daughter met him at the doorway immediately, wrapping her arms around one dusty leg. The father laughed quietly despite exhaustion. Inside the room, lamplight glowed warmly against rough walls. Supper waited on the table. The familiar comfort of evening settled gently around the family. Outside, the first evening breeze moved through the streets carrying away some of the day's lingering heat. The sky above Rome deepened slowly from gold into violet. Birds crossed overhead toward rooftops and trees where they would rest through the night. And throughout the ancient city, ordinary families gathered once more beneath the soft light of oil lamps, returning to the quiet routines that shaped their lives day after day beneath the endless turning of the Roman world. As evening settled fully over Rome, the city slowly loosened its grip on the long heat of the day. Shadows deepened along narrow streets while warm air drifted softly between crowded buildings. One by one, market stalls disappeared beneath wooden shutters. The loudest voices faded. Footsteps became slower, heavier with exhaustion. Above the city, the sky darkened into deep blue. The first stars appeared faintly beyond drifting smoke from cooking fires. Inside homes across Rome, families gathered around evening meals beneath the gentle glow of oil lamps. In one apartment near the edge of the city, a pot of lentils simmered quietly over a small flame while a mother tore pieces of bread into careful portions for her children. The room remained simple and crowded, but the evening carried a feeling of relief now that the hardest labor of the day had passed. Her husband sat near the doorway rubbing sore wrists after hauling stone since sunrise. Dust still clung to his hair and shoulders. Beside him, their oldest son repaired a cracked clay cup using cord and resin while listening sleepily to the conversation around him. The smell of supper filled the room. Warm bread. Cooked onions. Olive oil. Smoke drifting upward toward darkened ceiling beams. Outside the open window, distant laughter floated upward from the street below. Somewhere farther away, a musician played soft notes on a pipe while tavern voices answered now and then between stretches of silence. The youngest daughter leaned against her mother's side while chewing slowly on bread dipped in oil. Her eyelids grew heavier with every bite. Roman evenings often unfolded gently like this. Not grand or dramatic. Simply tired families resting together after long hours beneath the sun. These moments mattered deeply because daylight demanded so much energy from everyone. A father might leave home before sunrise and return only after dark. A mother's work rarely paused from morning until night. Children carried responsibilities long before adulthood. Even old age often brought continued labor instead of rest. So evening became a small island of calm inside difficult lives. In wealthier neighborhoods, lamps glowed behind painted walls and marble courtyards while servants moved quietly through large homes preparing for the night. Dinner guests reclined on couches discussing politics, trade, or poetry while cool water reflected torchlight from nearby fountains. Yet beneath the luxury, familiar family rhythms remained. An older woman worried quietly over a son traveling far from Rome. A child resisted bedtime despite drooping eyes. A grandfather rubbed aching knees beneath the dining table while pretending not to notice the discomfort. The details differed, but human life remained much the same. In one large villa, a young servant girl crossed the courtyard carrying folded linens toward the sleeping rooms. The stone beneath her sandals still held warmth from the afternoon sun. Crickets had begun singing softly beyond the garden walls. The girl paused briefly beside the fountain. Water rippled gently in silver moonlight. For a moment she simply stood there breathing the cooler evening air against her tired face. Then she continued her work. Servants and enslaved workers often remained awake longer than the households they served. Kitchens needed cleaning. Lamps required filling. Floors had to be swept before morning. Their labor stretched quietly into the night after everyone else began sleeping. Back in the crowded insulae, families searched for comfort wherever they could find it. Some climbed onto rooftops carrying blankets and mats because upper rooms trapped too much heat after sunset. Rooftops offered moving air, open sky, and a little freedom from crowded walls. On one rooftop near the river district, several neighboring families rested together beneath the stars. Children whispered softly while lying on blankets beside their parents. An old man pointed upward toward constellations he had known since childhood. Nearby, a woman brushed her daughter's hair while listening to conversations drifting lazily through the warm night air. From above, Rome looked softer. Lamps flickered across the darkness like scattered fireflies. Temple roofs gleamed pale beneath moonlight. The distant murmur of the city blended into something almost peaceful. A breeze carried the smell of river water mixed with smoke and warm stone. For a little while, people could forget the crowded streets below. The Tiber River moved quietly through the darkness beyond the rooftops. At the docks, only a few workers remained awake now. Most ships rested tied beside wooden piers while water lapped softly against their hulls. Torches flickered beside warehouses stacked with grain, wine jars, cloth, and olive oil waiting for tomorrow's labor. A fisherman sat alone beside the river repairing a torn net beneath weak lamplight. His hands moved automatically through the rope. Tie. Pull. Loop. Tighten. He had repeated these motions for so many years that they no longer required thought. Nearby, his small son slept curled beneath a blanket beside stacked baskets. The father glanced toward the child occasionally while continuing his work. Tomorrow before dawn they would return to the river together. Roman family life often centered around shared labor like this. Parents and children worked beside one another constantly. Skills passed naturally through observation and repetition. A child learned fishing by untangling nets beside a parent. Learned baking by shaping dough each morning. Learned weaving by watching older hands move thread across wooden frames. Most knowledge traveled quietly from generation to generation inside ordinary homes and workshops. Night deepened further over the countryside as well. Farmhouses glowed faintly among vineyards and olive groves beneath a sky crowded with stars. The sounds there were different from the city. No wagon wheels. No shouting vendors. Only insects humming through grass. Wind moving gently through trees. Occasional animal sounds drifting from distant fields. Inside one farmhouse, an elderly grandmother sat beside the hearth spinning wool while the rest of the family slept nearby. The fire had burned low now, leaving only soft orange light across the room. Her hands moved slowly but steadily. She remembered teaching her own daughters this same work many years earlier. Long evenings spent spinning thread while children slept nearby. Stories whispered beside firelight. Rain tapping softly against the roof during winter storms. So much had changed since then. And yet the simple rhythms remained familiar. Bread baked. Clothing repaired. Children raised. Fields planted and harvested. Roman family life moved forward through repetition more than through sudden change. Seasons passed. Generations passed. But ordinary routines continued beneath them all. Back inside Rome, many homes had already fallen silent. Children slept first. Their breathing softened the darkness while parents continued quiet tasks nearby. A mother washed wooden bowls in a small basin beside fading lamplight. A father counted coins carefully beside the doorway trying to plan tomorrow's expenses. An older sister folded blankets while listening to neighbors speaking softly through thin walls. Apartment buildings carried every sound. Crying babies. Arguments. Coughing. Laughter. Footsteps climbing narrow staircases late into the night. Families learned to sleep through noise because true silence rarely existed inside the city. In one tiny room above a workshop, a young couple sat together near the window after their children had fallen asleep. The woman mended a torn tunic while the man stared quietly into the street below. Neither spoke for several minutes. They were simply tired. The kind of tiredness that settles deep into the body after years of labor. Eventually the man reached over and adjusted the lamp wick slightly lower to save oil. Small economies mattered. Everything cost effort. Oil. Bread. Wood. Water. Families measured resources carefully because waste could become dangerous. Outside, the streets emptied more and more as midnight approached. Night watchmen walked slowly through the darkness carrying staffs and small lamps. Their footsteps echoed against stone walls while stray dogs moved silently through alleys searching for scraps. A cool breeze finally drifted through the city carrying relief after the long warmth of the day. Curtains stirred softly beside open windows. On rooftops, sleeping children rolled closer beneath blankets. Fountains continued their endless flowing beneath moonlight. Inside a quiet apartment near the Forum, a mother checked once more on her sleeping infant before lying down beside the rest of the family. She listened carefully to the child's breathing in the darkness. Slow. Steady. Peaceful. Only then did she close her own eyes. Across Rome, countless families drifted deeper into sleep together. Workers resting sore muscles. Grandparents dreaming softly beside cooling hearts. Children curled against parents beneath thin blankets. And above them all, the ancient city rested beneath stars that had watched over generations of ordinary Roman lives flowing quietly through the endless rhythm of days and nights. The night over Rome had grown very still now. The last lamps burned low behind quiet windows. The streets that had carried so many footsteps through the long day rested beneath soft moonlight and cooling air. Even the fountains seemed gentler at this hour, their water whispering quietly into empty stone basins. Across the city, families slept close together. Children curled beneath worn blankets. Fathers resting tired hands after years of labor. Mothers finally still beside sleeping infants. Grandparents breathing softly near fading hearth fires. The great noise of Rome had drifted away into silence. Only small sounds remained now. A distant breeze moving through narrow alleyways. A shutter creaking softly in the night. Sandals of a lone watchman fading slowly down an empty street. Far beyond the city walls, the countryside rested beneath the same ancient sky. Olive trees stood dark against the hills. Fields cooled beneath silver moonlight. Farmhouses glowed faintly in the distance before one final lamp disappeared into darkness. The river continued flowing quietly beside the sleeping world. Steady. Endless. just as it had for countless generations. And somewhere beneath those stars, ordinary Roman families dreamed through the night, their lives woven gently together by bread, labor, love, exhaustion, and the quiet comfort of home. The mothers who carried water at dawn. The fathers who worked beneath the heavy sun. The children who chased one another through dusty streets. The old hands mending sandals beside evening lamps. Small lives. Quiet lives. Lives history rarely spoke about. Yet together, they formed the true heartbeat of the ancient world. And now the fires had dimmed. The markets had fallen silent. The warm Roman night had wrapped itself softly around rooftops, courtyards, fields, and sleeping rooms. Everything slowed. Everything softened. Until at last, beneath the calm sky above the ancient city, Rome itself seemed to drift gently into sleep beside the endless flowing water of the dark and peaceful river.